Okay, hello everybody. Hello, welcome. Welcome everyone. I am an assistant professor of global contemporary art here at the School of Art and Art History. And before I turn it over to our Dean, Sahara Byrne, to introduce our wonderful speaker for this evening, I would like to thank Jeffrey Shamos and Lauren Anasuski and all of the graduate students for their help in organizing tonight's lecture. And there will be a small reception after this lecture near the front gallery. I encourage you all to visit the current exhibition up in the gallery titled Ruminations, a selection of works from the DU collection that was curated by students in last year's curatorial practicum class. But I especially want to thank the namesake for this lecture series, Mary Lanius, who will be turning 95 next week. Yep. And we will send her this video so she can watch this tomorrow. Mary was my professor here at DU 24 years ago, and Stephen's professor here 50 years ago. And I know we are both indebted to Mary for many reasons. Mary Lanius worked for the Denver Art Museum for many years, particularly in their South Asian art collections. In addition to her extensive work at the museum, Mary also taught for many years here at DU. As I mentioned, I was a graduate student here at the University of Denver 24 years ago in Mary's Art of South and Southeast Asian Art and Architecture class. I remember quite vividly Mary showing us dozens of photos of Indian and Cambodian temples as she related her personal travel stories interwoven with art historical information. The course certainly made an impression on me, and I'm so thrilled Mary and I have kept in touch in the years since. Thank you, Mary, for your ongoing support of the DU School of Art and Art History. This series has included lectures by artist Anila Kayum-Aga and Tenzing Rigdal. It has also included lectures by Professor Susan Huntington and curator Carl Deprezzeni from the Rubin Museum of Art, and curator Siddharth Shah from the Peabody Essex Museum. Last year, we welcomed Lee Er-Jung, the director of the National Gwangju Museum in South Korea. And now it's my pleasure to bring up our Dean, Sahara Byrne, to introduce our speaker for tonight.
Thank you, and thank you to Mary Lanius as well from me. I'm sorry that, I'll talk loud too. Yes, it's interesting to talk into a mic for a different audience. Hello, Mary, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight's distinguished guest, Dr. Stephen P. Huyler. He's a DU alumnus who graduated in 1973 with a Bachelor of Arts, he says, in Indian Studies, and I looked that up, and DU thinks it's history, so I really want to know about the interdisciplinary nature of your bachelor's degree if we get a chance, because I think that's super. I always love it when there's differences in systems, so I'm very curious to find out about your interdisciplinary bachelor's degree here at the University of Denver. Great, I knew I would. I had a feeling when I read the blog. If you haven't taken a look at Stephen's blog and his website, please do take a look. He has spent his life as an art historian, author, curator, cultural anthropologist, and photographer. He has devoted more than 5 decades, to studying the art and people of India. He has spent more than 124 months in the field doing research, which is just incredible. And Dr. Huyler has conducted a remarkable cross-cultural survey of Indian craftsmanship and ritual art, documenting the profound meaning behind rural India's sacred traditions. So we're going to learn a lot tonight. His curatorial and photographic work has been featured in over 25 major museum exhibitions, including the American Museum of Natural History, no big deal, huge, the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, my hometown's Museum of Art, the Museum of Art I grew up going to, so I was very excited to read that, and the Houston Museum of Natural Science. His photographs have also been showcased at the Smithsonian and the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. Dr. Huyler is the author of several acclaimed books, including Meeting God, Elements of Hindu Devotion, Daughters of India, Art and Identity, and Sonabai, Another Way of Seeing. Tonight, he joins us to share his latest work, Transformed by India, A Life, a deeply personal memoir that chronicles his journey beginning on his 20th birthday, which I did confirm from your blog was in the middle of your time studying here at the University of Denver. So that's very exciting to think about experiences that students have from the beginning to the end. So excited about that. When he crossed into India by bicycle rickshaw and continuing through a half century of connection, discovery, and transformation. With wit, insight, and candor, Dr. Huyler brings to life an India rarely seen by outsiders, an India of everyday people, profound creativity, and enduring spirit. His narrative flows seamlessly through stories that blend humor with heart, sacred with secular, and a deeply personal connection with universal ideas. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephen Huyler. Stephen also shares some time in Ojai, which is also very near Santa Barbara. He went to Thatcher School, which is, I know friends who went there too, so I'm so excited to hear about his adventure, both in India and also in my lovely, wonderful hometown of Santa Barbara. So he will share from us today. He won't be reading, as I understand, he will be showing ideas from Transformed by India, a Life, which is out in the lobby for sale today. So please welcome me, join me in welcoming Stephen. You are mic'd, correct?
I am mic'd for that.
Okay. So
And we don't need this.
I'm turning that off.
Thank you. And I need a little bit of water, and welcome. Right outside the door to this classroom is a South Indian Hindu kolam, a design of welcome. And I'm so excuse me. I'm so thrilled to be able to be here. I owe a tremendous amount to DU, and particularly to Mary Lanius, who I will talk about the trajectory of my life, and thank you, Mary, since you'll be hearing this. You opened doors for me that are still opening, and for which I am deeply grateful. But I'm also really grateful for my education here at DU, and I will talk about that tonight. I also want to dedicate this to my beloved Helene, my wife, and to my brother, sister, who my brother and sister-in-law are about to...
They're on their way from the airport.
On their way from the airport. Their flight was due in at 8 o'clock this morning, and it got delayed from Jackson Hole. Ruth has come in from Jackson Hole last night, and anyway, and a close friend, Barbara, whom I've known in Jackson Hole when I was 11. So it's just, there's so many. And Ron, it goes back to almost the beginning of that for me. It was when you came to DU when I was still a student here, and after my first trip to India, and actually helped finance part of my education at DU by taking that beaded doorway. You know, so there's just so many layers here. I grew up in Ojai, California, and I was the son of a teacher at Thatcher School, and as Sahara said, but my mother and father, we lived on campus to begin with in the house right, does this have a pointer? It doesn't, but right here downstairs in an apartment, and we ate all our meals with a huge student body. I mean, not a huge student body, but a student body for up to 20 meals a week. And I learned a lot about extended community, which has served me very well. It makes India familiar to me from the moment I got there in some ways. But my father, our father, was the head of the horse program at Thatcher, and every student at that time had a horse. I come from a very much of a equestrian family, and it's interesting how that ties into my work in India, although I didn't expect it to. But my father was a well-known horseman. That's the three of us. You'll meet my brother when he gets here. We also spent our summers in Jackson Hole on a family ranch that our grandfather purchased exactly 100 years ago. And so we've been there a century. We just celebrated our centennial there. More to that later. So that was seminal to my life as well. This is part of the ranch. My parents were very much, my father was very much a cowboy, raised there from age 5. And our mother died there. I keep saying but our mother died there. My niece, Hillary, is here from Tucson, and so it's her grandmother and grandfather. I also, in Jackson Hole, was deeply influenced at an early age, personally, by Tatankwajila, Reginald Laubin, who was the adopted son of one bull, shown on the right here with him, with Reg, who was accredited by many to be the man who killed Custer. So I am one step removed, or two steps removed, from one bull. It's pretty amazing. And he and his wife, Gladys, were remarkably influential in how I structured my career as well. So I wanted to honor them. Also, I came from a very unusual background. My mother was born, our mother, was born in Korea. Our grandparents were born in Korea and grew up there as educators and Methodist missionaries. Our father was in the Chinese army. He was actually sequestered from the American army into the Chinese army, and my mother spoke Korean, Japanese, Mandarin, and English fluently. So all of that is part of my heritage. But I came to DU at age, please, there's plenty of room back here, and there's not an interruption whatsoever. And you're here right at the beginning. Nothing has happened so far except, except for some very sweet introductions. So I came to DU when I was 17, and it was my first real experience of living in a city, in an urban environment. I'm a small town boy from Ojai was population 5,000. Wilson, where we lived in Wyoming, was, what was it, 100 and something, or 300 or something when I was a kid. So, Denver was overwhelming, and I was a lousy student. I was terrible to begin with, my first year, because there was so much it offered. There were so many classes, and I couldn't possibly concentrate on one. And I came to major in creative writing, but just all these offerings were there. But DU was a different campus at that time. It was a smaller campus, a smaller student body. And when I got there, in 1970, the spring of my first year, I came in '69, this was Earth Day, and it was a time of great social movement and change, of which I was a part. As you can see, that was on April 22nd, 1970. But on May 5th was Kent State, and you remember, those of you that remember DU, well, if you remember the country, the universities everywhere shut down, and I was very much a part of that at DU, and the creation of what was called Woodstock West in the center of campus, and I was one of the nonviolent leaders. Even though I was very young, I kept insisting on nonviolence, and indeed we had that. Although the National Guard came in and I was dragged away by my hair and put into the state prison for just a few hours and was released. That was seminal too in my life. I went back. School was out. It was out in early May. It ended early. And I went back to Ojai and asked Beatrice Wood for a job. This was the other most seminal thing in my early life. And so Beatrice she employed me. She was a well-known ceramic artist and is considered to be one of the founders of the Dada movement, the mama of Dada as it goes, and a remarkable ceramic potter. But Beatrice, who had been the lover of Marcel Duchamp on the left and was a great friend of Krishnamurti, who was who lived in Ojai all of my life, and until he died, and so was also an influence upon me. It was Beatrice that suggested that I should go to India, I was a little disenchanted what was happening with I'm an iconoclast, with the focus on Native American arts in the early 70s, in 69, 70, and I looked for something else, and Beatrice said, India. No one is documenting that kind, the tribal art and the folk art of India. And she was right. There were very few people doing that. So I came back to DU, this is Beatrice, I came back to DU and started to study with dear Mary Lanius, who was one of the finest teachers I've ever had in my life. And I mean that totally sincerely. What Mary opened me to, the doors that she opened for me are, as I said, still opening. I'm still changing through that. It was her understanding who this poor, not poor in the sense of economically, but poor, confused young man was, and I was. She helped to give me a direction. She was the epitome of a fine professor or a fine teacher. These are the other three teachers that were so influential on me. So I studied with Dr. Charles Geddes, and that was the majority of my classes were in, where are you, Sarah? Oh, there you are. You're behind Ron, I didn't see you. So the majority of my classes were in the history department, so because I'll explain that, because I had the majority of classes there, I was given a degree, a BA in history. But I took many courses with Kate Kent in anthropology and with Dr. Kirk in Hinduism, Hindu story. And so I was actually, Mary opened me by giving me or lending me her copy of this catalog from the early 60s called Unknown India, what is it? Ritual Art of Tribal and Village. And so it does say Unknown India up there in the top. And so this is what they showed me. They showed me these clay horses that are placed under trees in South India. And I thought, wow, as well as folk art of textiles, embroidery textiles, of folk bronzes, which these were collected by Stella Kramrisch in an exhibition in Philadelphia Museum of Art, and traveled a little bit. This was the catalog, and it just blew my mind away. And so I began to prepare for what became my life's work in all of these departments. So I took courses on India in the art history department, religion department, anthropology department, sociology, political science, and language. I studied Sanskrit. So there were 7 different departments. And I was an interdepartmental major in Indian studies, or that's what I've always claimed, even though my degree is in Indian history. And it was wonderful. Most of those professors didn't know the other ones existed because the university was large enough that they hadn't met. They met through me. And actually, then there was a South Asian, at least there South Asian courses that happened after that was collaborative, but not before it. And those professors were superb. Dr. Geddes was also one of the finest teachers I've ever had, and the others too. Kate Kent was astounding, and I was just so lucky. That's what DU had brought. What DU, and that's what I wanted to talk about here for a moment, is if you were drawn to learn, the world was your oyster. There were people here, and there are people here, who are among the best in their fields, and whom responded to a student who had the interest and the drive to follow through. And I think that's true. I think that's what we were taught by our parents growing up in a school, is that teachers love a kid who shows initiative. And I didn't my first year, but as soon as I had that inspiration, I found something that I followed through for my entire life, for now 54 years. So I decided that I would go overland to India by local transport. It was an inexpensive way to go, but actually probably a little bit more expensive than flying, maybe not. And the only way to prepare for the overland journey was by old National Geographic, starting in 1896 and coming up like 1911 and 1921 and 1936, et cetera, different issues that focused on those countries. Because there were no books except for one Fodor on Iran and another on Turkey, which made no sense to me because I was traveling at a extremely low budget. So I studied the National Geographics, and I planned this trip, which is what I did. overland by local transport by myself at age 19. I took the joint flight from Denver, from all the different universities in the 4 states. Everybody flew in, we flew into Paris, and then they all went to different universities except for me. I was the only one, and I went I got independent study credit from the university, which gave me two course credits for my research in India, and I did this trip. And so Beatrice, I went back, worked for her that summer, my first summer, my last summer before I went to India. And she that summer introduced me to one of the 2 truly great Indian women that I've met, who were also influential. Rukmini Devi Arundale, whom I met in Ojai. She was there visiting Beatrice. They were close friends. I'll come back to Rukmini. This is age 19, September 1st, my mother delivering me and my father, who took the picture, to LAX, LA International Airport, with everything that I took for, turned out to be 10 months. And this is sideways, but it's showing you that trip that I took. So from Paris all the way here, all the way through the Balkans to Turkey, and over through Turkey, through Iran, over to Afghanistan, through Afghanistan, over the Khyber Pass into India, and then down through India. So that was my first trip in India. Starting, my first view of I came by train straight from Munich, and landed in Istanbul, and was just my socks were blown off. And I loved Turkey. Went through Cappadocia, which I'd found out about through those old National Geographics, and spent a few days there exploring the different sites. And this is in eastern Turkey, and there are parts in my book that talk about some extraordinary experiences that I had through them. I mean, really quite amazing experiences I had through Turkey and Iran, and into Afghanistan. Now, this is Herat, Afghanistan, in 1971. So it's before any of the 20th century invasions and 21st century wars that have obliterated so much of this culture. And it was a very welcoming culture that I really deeply loved. And I had studied through Dr. Geddes Islamic culture extensively. So I had taken a whole course in Hadith, in Islamic tradition, and it really did prepare me for all of those countries that I went to. This is still Herat, and I'm just showing you, there are not many photographs of Herat before it was all bombed out. It's just, I realized when I was putting this all together after I'd written the book and for this series, I realized, wow, I've got some great photos. I mean, they're not good photographs as a photographer, because I was a lousy photographer, but they're good records. And all of these images and many more are on my website, with the book chapter to chapter, so you can look up far more than you're seeing tonight, and you're seeing a lot. This is the Khyber Pass, going over it, and when I entered Pakistan, there were signs everywhere saying "Crush India." There were camouflaged tanks and anti-aircraft missiles. It was late October of 1971, right before the last major war declared war with Pakistan, between Pakistan and India. And I went across the border, as Sahara said, by bicycle rickshaw, not this, I don't have a picture of it, where I put the old guy in the back and insisted he carry my pack, and he had this huge grin, and I bicycled him 8 miles into India, because I was young and fit, and I thought he shouldn't have to do that. There were no buses, there were no trains going. And there were signs everywhere saying "Crush Pakistan." This was my first bus in India that I got after that rickshaw ride. And along the way, I saw this painting and mud bas-relief, which was, I didn't even know I had this picture, was prophetic for what my career became, as you will see later on. I went and spent my 20th birthday, my first night in India, at the Golden Temple. That's the Sikh Mecca, or Jerusalem, or Rome for the Sikhs. And I spent it in the Golden Temple upstairs there, with the Holy Granth being read and sung below. And it was deeply seminal for me. And that night where I was sitting, it was almost, until 2 in the morning, I sat there cross-legged. I saw these paintings for the first time, and they so inspired me. They were the decorations, and you could not photograph inside the temple. And there were no postcards, I found out the next day, and there were no books because it had never been photographed. So I did what was sort of prophetic for what my career would be. I asked around and found the last artist who was the son of the last man to paint those paintings. And he had his father's studies. And so he invited me in. I was just a 20-year-old, my 20+1 day. And I was going through his collection, and I asked him if he would sell them. He'd never thought of it. And I went back years later and purchased them. They're now in a museum in India. And I took the train, third-class train, that's the third-class train, down to Delhi. That's how I traveled around India. It cost almost nothing. It was crowded. And when I was in Delhi, that's me just after I arrived in Delhi, just after turning 20, and I met the other person who was so deeply influential in my life, which is Kamala Devi Chattopadhyaya, who was the right hand of Gandhi and set up the entire crafts cooperatives all throughout the country and cottage industries. So she was a primary women's activist and fighter for Indian freedom, who was jailed for 5 years, 1 year in solitary confinement, worked closely with Gandhi, is recognized as having persuaded Gandhi that he was a misogynist in many of his attitudes, and to speak out for women and women's rights in India. So she was a remarkable woman and more influential in my life than I ever realized until I read her most recent biography, which is just fabulous. And so she said, as I set up the crafts movement. So I went to her home, and she said, come back tomorrow and tell me where you want to go. So I took my old National Geographic map that had been folded up in my pack and was all creased, and I drew a line of where I wanted to go, and she said, no, don't go there, go here, go there. And then this remarkable and every Indian still, even though she died 20 years ago, knows who she was, as well as Rukmini Devi, the other one. They all know who she was. They all are kind of floored. And I didn't realize, I didn't know she was so great. And she wrote individual letters to more than 60 of the leaders of the crafts movement and said, take care of this boy. And they did. And so I went down into South India to Madras. I came as the guest of Rukmini Devi, who had been recognized as one of India's preeminent Bharatanatyam dancers, classical Indian dancers, who fought the British to allow it. It had been banned in British India, classical Indian dance, and she fought that and founded the first large and well-acknowledged school of classical Indian dance and music, Kalakshetra. So I lived there for a few weeks while I did research in Tamil Nadu. And my wife, my then girlfriend, Helene, came to visit me for 2 weeks in December of 1971. And I was so impressed that she came all that way. And especially since her parents were rather right-wing conservative, to say the least, that she was able to persuade them to let her come at age 20. And I proposed. So I was so grateful. Right while the day before she arrived, war broke out between Pakistan and India, the 1971 war. This is just some statistics about it, but it did, of course, affect our stay together. She flew back, and I continued to do my research in South India. So I went to find those terracotta those clay horses, the groupings that were placed under sacred trees, and I began to study them to try to understand what it was. And it's about ephemeral art. I realize I'm talking a little speedily, so I'll try to, I get excited, and also I'm concerned about the time, so let me calm down a little bit. The subject matter, it's about the idea of ephemerality for me. It's the idea that you could make something that is extremely beautiful and beautifully crafted, and that it's only valuable for the moment in which it's given, because it's a sacred bond between the devotee and the deity. And then it's left under a tree to, if it's in this case of terracotta, to dissolve. I was just fascinated by that. And you can see the tie-in to my my equestrian history, although I didn't really even think of it at the time. And I also began a study. So the two fields that I did my documentary, my paper on, got my credit for two different papers that I wrote in India. One was about Ayanar horses, terracotta sculptures in South India, in Tamil Nadu, and the other was about kolam making. These are the women making sacred designs on the ground in front of their homes every single day of the year in more than 1 million houses. It's just an astounding statistic. So they are often plain, for holidays they're colorful. We'll come back to that. And then I was doing a cross-cultural survey of Indian craftsmanship and things made by hand. And this is just a few of the pictures that I took in Tamil Nadu, but I did this in every state I went through during that 9-10 months. And studying, going to temples, this is still in South India and Tamil Nadu, but going everywhere and trying to understand it, trying to get my mind around what is practical Hinduism, that became seminal as well. As I went along, I met people who became also important mentors, like Dinkerbai and his wife Kelkar, I call them Kaka and Kaku Kelkar, in Pune, who really opened to me the whole field of folk bronzes and other decorative arts, which was their passion. And then N.T. Wakani in Gujarat, who took me under his wing for 2 weeks and taught me textiles and embroidery. And that became what I thought would be my my primary research area for my life. It didn't end up like that, but I did spend some years studying it. And I collected pieces that I brought back to this country. So here are the statistics. I had traveled 9,000 miles through 17 countries in 8 months, 239 days, spent a total of $2,400, only $960 on myself for that whole trip, right? $1,540 spent on arts and crafts, and I sold a third, one piece to the Denver Art Museum, others elsewhere, one to the Newark Art Museum and some other places, that provided me my last 2 years of tuition here and expenses. So it really was a good relationship, and DU did that. I came back, I married Helene in 1973, right after I graduated from DU, immediately after. And Beatrice was our maid of dishonor, she said. You know, she's a Dada person. She was our maid of dishonor. This is 1973, you realize. But Helene wore a silk sari, on our going away outfits. And we moved back to Denver. And this is on South Race Street, 2376 South Race Street. And it was a little garage apartment. This was it. You can see it's partially furnished with Indian art, actually quite a bit downstairs. And then we went to India on the same trip, overland, by the same kinds of transport. Locally, although I tried to live a little bit higher level. This is Helene and me. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but Helene and me in India, during which time we went back to Amritsar, where the Golden Temple was, and I purchased that collection of studies for the Golden Temple, which I've given now to the Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore. But it's something like 31 studies. and with the money that I'd made from selling the textiles to people like the Denver Art Museum. This was part of the textile collection that I started putting together on that trip, expecting that I would continue to buy and sell textiles because I was good at it. Whoa, I did something I shouldn't have. These are just some of the textile collection that I purchased back in 74, 75 when Helene and I were there, and some of the sculptures that I collected at that time. I'm not going to go in detail about this. I'm just trying to give you a kind of overview, but unfortunately Helene ended up in the hospital with a disease, and we had to truncate the trip after already 8 months of travel. It was going to have been a year. We came back to Denver, where I went to DU. We lived on Steel Street between 10th and 11th, 1029 Steel, while I finished my degree. That's when I met you, Ron, was during this year. And I think, maybe not, maybe it was there right after the first trip. It might have been, it doesn't matter. And then I continued my work with Beatrice Wood, right, who continued until she died at age 105 as still a working artist with a kiln full of new pottery that was in the firing when she died. She was a great influence on my life. Dr. Geddes here at DU persuaded me to apply to the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, which was his alma mater, and I went where he did his PhD, and I went there for that. And that's where I have my degree from. I consider myself a cultural anthropologist, although my degree is in art and archaeology of South Asia at the department, but that was because the anthropology department did not recognize cultural anthropology, only social and physical anthropology, and I wanted to study art as a manifest of the people, of what it related to the people's lives. So that's why I consider myself an anthropologist, not an art historian, although technically I am. We lived in London, in North London, for 3.5 years, and during which time, and I worked at the V&A in their textile collections. They had 60,000 pieces of Indian textiles that I worked with closely, and I could handle them, and I learned so much by that. And then I returned to India every year for an average of 4 months of doing field research. And what I was doing was trying to continue that cross-cultural survey of Indian rural material culture, which is really what I was doing, or what I began to call it. It was craftsmanship and folk art earlier, and then I began to broaden my concept and looking at architecture, looking at the layout of buildings as related to the landscape. The types of architecture that dealt with rainfall or dry seasons or whatever it might be, whatever was the climactic area. I was dealing with the people of India and trying to record who they were. I was looking at their activities, farming techniques, craftsmanship, different kinds of weaving and block printing and embroidery, and I was recording everything I could. And that, and as well as the lives of the relationships of family, of mother to child, of father to son, from grandparents to grandchildren. And then I became more and more fascinated with women's ritual and women's identity. And who were they? Now remember, my mentors, I've told you about 3 primary ones, were all women. Our mother was a very strong woman. Our grandmothers were very strong. My sister is. And it's just, I've had a deep respect embedded in my DNA for the strength and individual power of women. And I've tried to open myself to that more and more and allow that to express itself rather than just me. But as I traveled around India, I collected more and more sculptures as well as textiles, bronzes. I was buying them for weight value they were in slag heaps, and I literally was paying at that point 25 rupees a kilo, which was about $3, $3.50 a kilo for all of these bronzes, and hundreds more that they were otherwise going to be melted down and turned into something else. And so I've given all those to museums. This was my collection in London, just in the room there. And then we moved down to Cornwall, and we lived in Cornwall for 4 years, ostensibly to write my doctoral dissertation. But as you will, if you read the book, will find out, or the book is also on audio, so Audible and audio books and et cetera. But you'll find out that one of my doctoral thesis subjects was prohibited by the Indian government, and I had to begin again. And so I went back and started studying terracotta. But at any rate, this was an exhibition I did in Cornwall, my first real exhibition, and that had some of the sculptures as well as the textiles. And then we moved to Maine. So after 7 years in Britain, we moved to Camden, Maine, where we're still residents, and we've been there for 42 years. So we moved there in '83 to the coastal town of Camden. It's beautiful. It's wonderful to live there. It's a great sense of community. And one of the things I wanted to talk to tonight is about community, because that's really what it's all about. It's all about listening to one another and being open to one another and not being divisive. You know, we're all part of this. We're all in this together. There is no them and us. So while I was in Camden and learning the American sense of community, I got my first contract for this book with Abrams, Harry and Abrams in New York, which was based upon my work of that cross-cultural survey of Indian rural culture. And that came out in 1985, and I bought the first computer in Maine. I mean, the first Apple Macintosh in Maine, literally the first one. And I typed the book out at 128K. You can only do, if you remember, 2.5 pages at once, and then you had to link it, do another 2.5 pages, and link that, and do another 2.5 pages. And they were all different files. And I also started studying, because my photographs were abysmal, I started studying photographs at the Maine photographic workshops. And I got better. And fairly rapidly. And that ended up in my next book, which was with Mappin in India. This is my doctoral dissertation, but the book of it. And it was also co-published by the Indira Gandhi Center for the Arts. And that was studying the potter's art, starting with making of pottery, to marketing of pottery, all over India, in 14 states, to sacred pottery. So this is a shrine to Vrindavati as Tulsi, the goddess. And then those terracotta horses that I had been working with really all along. You know, I just kept going back. And these on the far right are the largest terracottas ever known in the history of mankind that I discovered in a remote village. And I have lectured about that to professional archaeological and museum audiences around the world, and no one has challenged that successfully. And nobody has said, well, actually there is, you know, I kept expecting somebody would. But these are 16 feet high, 16 to 18 feet high, and they're made in one piece and fired on the spot. And they're so much larger than the ones in China, the Xi'an ones, for example. So there are terracotta animals, primarily horses, placed under sacred trees in virtually every district of India. And none of that had been collectively unstudied. So that was something that was perhaps one of, starting with Mary, was one of my gifts that I've been able to do with in my life. But the other has been consecutively all along, has been studying women's ephemeral art. So in the same way that the terracottas are ephemeral, they're made and for one moment only, so is women's art in most communities of India. Almost everywhere, in almost every home, women at some point or another will make sacred designs to adorn their home. And we're starting here in Tamil Nadu, where that design outside is from, but it's done in rice flour. You can see the texture of it here in front of every single home in more than 1 million houses. Every single day of the year, it lasts an hour, maybe 2, is walked over, blown away, driven over, and just doesn't exist. And then a fresh one that is a different design, because the women pride themselves in never repeating a design. Think of the magnitude of that. Think of what that means. And it goes as far back in history as we have any record. So 1 million homes, how many years? How many people? How many days in a year? You know, just think of it. It's just the magnitude, you can't conceive of it. And I keep taking pictures. And as I said, my pictures have gotten better, and now what am I going to do with them? We'll talk about that. So this is that was in Tamil Nadu. This is in Kerala, where they make them for, I had a blank, not Pongal. Pongal is Tamil Nadu, Onam festival in the summer, late summer, and they do that in rice flour and then flowers. And then up in Orissa, so I'm just jumping around the country, where women will resurface their mud walls with a new layer of mud mixed with cow dung, which is adhesive. The cow dung keeps it from flaking. And then they'll resurface it with rice paste made from the rice that they grind from their own fields. And it's just exquisite. And again, they only do this for every important festival, so it's not every day, but it's many, many, many times during the year, or it was, because it's almost now completely wiped out. And the rice paste goes on clear and dries white. So the magnitude of what I just said is almost wiped out. So my tens of thousands of photographs of just finished, edited photographs of just this area are the only record. This is one house on the left, same house on the right, 1 week apart, right? They change their design every single time they do it, you know? And they're all sacred designs, mostly for the goddess Lakshmi, can be for other deities. This is in eastern Rajasthan, in Salwai Madhupur district, and the women paint their walls in whatever they choose. They're symbols, but they're not necessarily sacred, and the floor with carefully proscribed sacred designs. So that it's quite different between floor on the left and right on the wall. There's no rice grown there, so it's white lime, and they do this also for every important life festival during the year. And the variety is quite wonderful. Or in far western India, in Rajasthan, in Jaisalmer district, where the women in a camel herders community, very, very remote in the desert, paint once each year, because they have only less than 5 inches of rain a year. So they can't do it regularly, and they resurface their walls with camel dung mixed with clay, and do these geometric designs, which are purely traditional. That is not a contemporary design, right? And the interiors are also magnificent, done in bas-relief. So these are the kinds of things that I document in every community. Or in the urban city of Jodhpur, when I first went there, it was all white. Then one woman began mixing blue with her whitewash to make it whiter, and she liked the effect, and she painted her house blue. And then it caught on as I watched it and documented it. And it became what I called in Painted Prayers, my book, the Blue City, and now it's called the Blue City. Maybe others have called it that, but that was the first one in print that I know of. And anyway, this was the city there. It's just extraordinary. It's now gone back to white. It's almost all white again. But it is exquisite. And then in Gujarat, so we're coming kind of full circle in India, down the western coast, the women of the Rabari nomadic group of people doing mud bas-relief on their walls, which they inlay with glass and mirror. And the interiors of the home can be exquisite, and the mirrors just shine with a single light bulb or a single candle. They just glitter. And then because of that work, I was invited by the Arthur M. Sackler Gallery, which is now the National Museum of Asian Art, at the Smithsonian to do an exhibition of my book, Painted Prayers. That was my first major exhibition, and then of that work, and then it traveled around the United States. And this was on Connecticut Avenue. I was thrilled. And then through that work, they invited me to do an exhibition on practical Hinduism. And I began collecting material. I insisted that if I'm going to do it, I would only do it and show the art as it's meant to be seen rather than on pedestals. And so that meant that taking the, whoops, that was out of order somehow. That one. Oh no. So I began going back, excuse me, to India, documenting personal ritual of household ritual, and what did that mean for, and could I photograph it, and could I get permission to photograph it? And in small shrines and in temples, could I get permission? And I did. And so that was a several-year process. And talking about the aspects of devotion and the use of flame, the use of offerings, dressing and adorning a deity with clothes and flowers before you see it is a gesture of respect, so you don't see the image devoid of that the way that we would normally in a museum. And it's essential for Hindus to see it like this, dressed and adorned. And you're forbidden. Even the devotee is forbidden from seeing the image without it being dressed and adorned. Only the priest can see it. And that Hinduism is a personal devotion. It's not a congregational devotion. It's about individual choice. And then the ephemeral in devotion. So these are Durga images made in Calcutta that are worshipped for 8 days and then thrown ritually into the river and allowed to dissolve back, because they're clay, unfired clay, into the river. So again, it's that concept of what does that mean? And how different is ephemerality in art from how we look at the permanence of signed art? Not that that's wrong, but just how different it is. I have my name out there, for God's sakes, all over the place. It's a little embarrassing, but I do. It's not that I'm not a product of our culture, but the artists that I'm talking about don't ever have their name involved with it. There's not an ego involved. It's the personal relationship, and that moves me greatly. So my exhibition, that one photograph was out of context. My exhibition, Puja, Expressions of Hindu Devotion, opened at the Sackler Gallery in May 4th, 1996 for 6 months. And because of popular demand, it was there for 4 years. The guards clicked 750,000 visitors. We did a outreach program to the surrounding schools, and it was all about images in devotion. You see, they were dressed. Those are fine chola bronzes on the left, but they were dressed and adorned not by me, not by the curators, but by Hindu priests, pujaris, purohits, who came in and did it and sanctified them. Of course, we couldn't prohibit people from wearing shoes in the exhibition. We couldn't have flames in the exhibition. There were things that we had to adapt to, although we tried. But still, so this was the Smithsonian exhibition, and it was very popular. And it was really exciting to work so closely with the Smithsonian for those years. And then I put those books, that material together as my book. There's a copy of it outside, Meeting God, Elements of Hindu Devotion, that was published by Yale University Press. And it's a full-color book, which I packaged myself. So I wanted it to be small and portable, and you could carry it to India and could use it as a reference material if you wanted. And then I was succeeded in having an exhibition of that, because the Puja show could not travel by definition. It was they're our national treasures. They couldn't travel to other museums, and their insurance would have been prohibitive. So I created another exhibition at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, which was on Hindu devotion. And one of the things, I had gone to the Natural History Museum as a little boy and been so impressed by the dioramas and the naturalistic looking things, and Otmar von Für's kind of concept of making things by hand for, I think maybe John is here, but, maybe not, it's just something out of the corner of my eye. And I just saw something, I think it was looking for another door, was all. But it would be just on the right. Yeah. Right here. Yeah. Come ahead. This is our brother. And is Deanne around? She parking or?
Yeah, she's driving around the block.
Oh dear. So maybe, yeah, right there, John. And so we're at the American Museum of Natural History, John. And so they made for me, one of my provisions for doing the show, it was a 3-year curatorial thing that I did, worked with them, with more than 1,000 employees unionized under me. It was just extraordinary. It was just amazing. How do you work with that kind of unionization? But they made for me this banyan tree. And and underneath it, we put parts of their collection, which were these stone nagas from Kerala that I found in their reserve collection that had never been exhibited and been collected in the 1860s, had been accessed in the 1860s. And so we dressed and adorned them, and they're under the banyan tree. And people would come and actually worship there. It was so interesting to watch, particularly. And then there were interactive shrines. So I created this whole set of interactive shrines where someone would go in and open a door and see into a shrine and then be asked to close the door afterwards. And there were, I think, 14 of those in the show, a Ganesh shrine. And there were ongoing pujas that were taken there by the Hindu community. It was wonderful and very humbling. And then, this is the book. The exhibition opened on the 8th of September, 2001. So it was a big to-do. It was a huge splash in all the media. On Sunday, it was a Saturday, on the Sunday, the New York Times had a back page saying Meeting God on it in color. And Monday, museums are closed, and Tuesday was my big press day where I was being interviewed by Time and Newsweek. I thought it would be the height of my career, and that was 9/11. And so that was the end. The book was remaindered. The exhibition, which was supposed to go 7 more museums, was canceled. It was closed for a month, and then it reopened, and it became a place of sanctuary. It was really quite amazing. And there would be hundreds of New Yorkers in there, some of them Hindu, but most of them not, just in quiet prayer. And it was very humbling, to be involved with that. It was very, very meaningful. But my life, which seemed to be on a trajectory away from the folk art and craft and women's identity into this thing about Hinduism for quite a number of years, suddenly, where do I go? So I reinvented my wheel by going back and documenting women's art and identity more. And this book is also in the lobby if you care to look at it. And so I went throughout India and I interviewed more than 1,000 women over a several year period. And then I realized that I would not do justice to, and I was taking their stories and taking photographs of them, and then I realized it wouldn't do justice to Indian womanhood to just make these broad generalizations. There were too many books that were doing that and misunderstanding by Indian standards who the women of India are. And so I let them tell their stories of 20 women in 20 different, very diverse communities, from old to young, from doyen to child to slum dweller, from Hindu to Muslim to Jain, to different ways. Women who were more or less in bondage to women who were, a software developer who started with nothing and sold her business for $330 million. So, it's just that. These are the women that I focused on, and I can't tell you all of their stories. That's another lecture, but it was really, for me, profound. And as much as possible, I tried to let them tell the story that they wanted to be heard. Not me as a white American male, talking about what I'm about. That's why this whole thing is a little odd to do my memoir about, with my picture on the cover. It's a little strange for me because really I'm trying to give voice to the people of India, or recognition to the pulse of who they are. And that's that woman on the upper right-hand corner. And one of those women was Sonabai Rajawar, from the most remote village I've ever been to, which was in Chhattisgarh, in Surguja district. And Sonabai I had met many years before, in the 80s, when she first was discovered. And actually she, I didn't talk about that, but I had done an exhibition early on in my career, co-curated an exhibition at Mingei International in San Diego of Indian terracotta, and Sonabai was brought for that exhibition. But Sonabai's story is really unique in India. This is not a part of a cultural mandate, but the psychosis of her husband, where she was kept in total isolation after their marriage in a home outside his community's boundaries that they built together. And there were no exterior windows. There was one door, and for 15 years, he did not allow her to leave that house. And he allowed no one inside. Now, if you or I were imprisoned in that, I am a creative man. You might be creative, and we might, any of us, need to express ourselves, but I might express myself darkly. Sonabai was a woman who had no training, did not come from, she said, Deanne, this way, please. Yay, you made it. So just anywhere back in there. Maybe back this way, Deanne, right here. So we're on to Sonabai, DB. Oh yeah, behind Hillary. And I'm so glad, I'm so sorry that you've had such a hard time getting here. But
we're here.
Well, I'm glad you're here. Maybe right behind you, you'll see a little better. Okay. And so Sonabai lived in that isolation, during which time she took clay from the edge of her well and began to make toys for her infant son. So she saw her son, she saw her father, or husband, but it was his psychosis that wouldn't allow her outside. Her son was allowed to go out and play and then go to school, but none of her family could come in, none of the villagers. She couldn't see anyone. So she started to sculpt, and she'd never been taught. And she loved the sculpting process, so she began to apply it to her mud walls, interior walls. And she took straw from her ropes and began to make hair. And she took bamboo and she cut strips of it from the bamboo that they'd used to construct the house. And she cut strips of it and made little circles and covered that with clay and made jali, made lattice work, and put clay inside the lattice work. And then took colors. These are later made, so these are poster colors. But she took colors that she invented in her kitchen from herbs and spices and greens and things like that, and she painted them. And after 15 years, she was allowed outside. The villagers were allowed inside, but it's such a remote village, and an illiterate village, largely, that nobody had any point of reference for how unusual her art was. And so this was the interior of her, is the interior of her house. And I just found that story to be amazing, that what she did in that total isolation was to create a vision of a beautiful world, of a healing world, of a world filled with whimsy and light and color. And I made a film about it, and a book about it, and an exhibition about it. To me, it's a profound message. We're taught in this world now that we're up against it. And we've done so much damage that we cannot rectify. We will not survive. Our world is damned. But then remember Sonabai, and remember what her life was like, and how she used her own initiative and her own creativity to make a difference, to really make a difference. And then she ended up being an internationally known artist. It's just incredible. And we can make choices. We can listen to one another. We can open our minds and our hearts to one another. And we can make change. We're not doomed. And so I did this exhibition about Sonabai that was fairly popular and traveled, starting in San Diego at the Mingay. So this is just the last. This is a summation. I've made it in an hour. In these 24, what is it? I can't count right now. 44 years, 54 years, that's it. Thank you. I have collected I have 250,000 slides that are edited, images of India, and digital images, and they are all going to the Kiran Nader Museum of Art in Delhi. They are digitizing them all, and at my request, they will not have my copyright on them, and they will be free to the Indian public. It's their legacy. That's the best that I can do. That's the most that I can do. But also, since I was photographing, I just published this book in India in late January, and I went around India, but I went to 2 book festivals, one in Calcutta, and the second one in Hyderabad. And the Hyderabad one was, if this will change, was here. I was blown away that this is Hyderabad. And this is literally right where the international Hyderabad International Book Festival was, where I was a featured speaker, but among many. And they estimated that there were between 100 and 120,000 visitors to the book festival. The one I'd been to in Calcutta had about, I don't know, maybe 1,000, maybe several hundred. So it was rather overwhelming. But so was where it was, that this was Hyderabad. And then when I went back to my room, remember I'd been scanning all these images for my book, I remembered that in 1978, I took these photographs in exactly the coordinates, geographic coordinates of that. So this is the value of my work, perhaps. Mine are the only photographs of many, many communities. Now everywhere people are photographing. Everybody has a smartphone, everybody is recording it, and that's great, and I don't need to do that work. But there is a value in that record. And there's also a value in just listening. You know, I said this in the beginning, it's not them and us, it's all us. Let's put our egos aside and let others speak and listen to them. Listen. People have a lot to offer, and there's no difference. There's no difference. Everybody is intelligent. There are some people that are more educated and academically, or better farmers, you know, or better craftsmen than they are in book learning. You know, it doesn't really matter what it is, but everybody has something to offer. Allow people to offer. Let's do that. Let's listen to one another and see. Good, it's still there. See if we can learn from one another. So that is perhaps the value of my work, if this will change. Just before starting this book tour, a woman, one of the women who makes columns in Mylapore in Chennai, did this one for me and took the photograph that I printed on canvas. So Kamlavati, I am very grateful for your offering this to be able to bring back to my alma mater, DU, with the lamps there. And I just came from Jackson Hole, where I said goodbye for the last time to our beloved ranch, which we've had to let go. But I am so grateful for my family, for my friendships, for the community which starts with family and moves outward into, that's what makes for me India so valuable, is that sense of belonging, that sense of identity, that sense of relationship that we are all part of, and for which I'm very grateful that I've been accepted as a white, tall American male. And there's a chapter in my, last chapter in my book about what that means to be a tall, white American male, and how biased am I through that, unconsciously, unintentionally. So But still I've been accepted. Still doors are open to me. Still people listen and allow me to listen to their stories and to represent them. And so I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to Helene, who's been the cornerstone of my life since we met in Jackson Hole when I was 16, and whom I loved. I met with Debbie right there, right behind Helene. The two of Debbie dragged Helene to a square dance, and there were two circles where the men are one circle and the women on the inside circle, and the music stops. That's your partner. That was Helene. So thank you, Debbie. And Debbie lives in Boulder and just got here in time. And that's my life. Thank you. And there is a little time maybe for questions, is there? And
To do that, we should probably mic up the question.
yeah.
I'm not sure if Sarah.
Do we? Yeah, we can use it this way. You know how to turn it on. And thank you very much, all of you, for coming and attending, and for making it, John and Deanne, and and the rest of you who've come long distances. Any questions?
Hello. First of all,
So loud so the rest can hear.
oh yeah. First of all, thank you. I really appreciated this talk, and it was very enlightening. I wanted to ask you how how the war between India and Pakistan affected your travels.
Well, many different ways. I intended to spend several weeks in Pakistan, but the border was closing, so I rushed into India, so I didn't ever get the chance to travel in Pakistan the way I had wanted to. But then when I was in South India with Helene and the war broke out, it's the only time in India where there was, Americans were pro-Pakistan as a government. We've often had interesting political maneuvers in our history. And so I did not agree with that, but people didn't know that. So that's really the only time ever in India, in that 2-week period and perhaps a week or two afterwards, where as an American, I've been singled out, and there were some hate shouts and a few pebbles thrown at us and things like that. Nothing that really was violent other than pebbles, but that affected me. Beyond that, it just is yet again one of those situations where wherever you are traveling outside of your own culture to learn news, wherever you are, to learn the news from another perspective, from another point of view than whatever your own reportages in whatever country you're in, it's going to be different, and it's going to open your mind to that. So my understanding of it, and my understanding of the Middle East, for example, is very different than most Americans that I know. So it's just that, not that Pakistan is the Middle East, but you understand that sort of. Anyway, yes. Anything else? Any other questions? Yes.
Hold on one second. Can I?
Yeah, and I need a sip of water, if you'll excuse me.
What's the history of art education in India from the timeline when you first went there to current?
Oh, thank you. The question was, what's the change, or what in the education, art history and understanding of art in the time when I went to India and to the time that now, it's profound, the difference. And I'm so glad you asked that question, because it enables me to talk about India. When I went in '71 was still very much under the yoke of British imperialism. And virtually every Indian I met, with only a few exceptions, was apologetic about their own culture and was in some ways embarrassed about their own heritage, as opposed to idealizing, having been brainwashed to idealize British, English, and Western education above their own history and their own art history, but history in general. And everywhere I went, when I was doing my work, literally, everywhere I went, except for the people that Kamala Devi introduced me to, and people of that ilk, you know, who were working in the crafts movement. Everyone, everywhere, on the trains and the buses, on the street, when I explained, when they asked what I was doing, and people are very friendly in India, asked what I was doing, would say, but you're working to keep India backward. That word has never been used in my presence in the last 20 years by anyone. And the self-pride, the justifiable self-pride in India, in their own history, in their own art history, in their own cultural monuments, in their own traditions, is profound. So when I was now, as opposed to what it was, so when I went, Beatrice was right, and Kamala Devi and Rukmini Devi and others welcomed me in because there were so few that were wanting to document that, those arts, and no one that was doing the cross-cultural survey that I ended up doing. No one. But there are thousands, tens of thousands doing that work now. They're everywhere. There are universities everywhere with courses in their own traditions, their own contemporary art history, and I mean modern art in India, and contemporary art, and then historical art. And courses are fabulous. There were good ones back in the day, but they were exclusive, and there were just the few. Now they're everywhere. And those of you that have traveled in India in the past versus now will know when we used to go to temples or palaces, you know, that were open to tourists. You would go and there'd be a sprinkling of people there, and mostly foreigners from different countries and some educated Indians. Now you can hardly get in them. I mean, seriously, you could wait hours, and it's push and shove. As people that know India well, there's not the same sense of personal distance. So there's a lot of pushing and shoving in crowds, and it can be very hard to get even to see these things. But I've had to learn to let that go because it's the people. I mean, not to mind it, because it's the people who are embracing their own heritage, their own culture. And do you see why I say that's a really good question? Because it's changed fundamentally. Not only academically, but in an awareness of the people. And yes, there's a lot of art that's changing. The women's art on the walls is changing. But change isn't, you know, there's nothing wrong with change. It happens globally. It's the personal identity. I'm not trying to hold on to traditions. That's not why I documented them. It's just have a documentation for it so that going forward we can know what was there. But if it's, you know, the creativity of India today is still phenomenal. It's just maybe in a different expression. It might be in computer arts or contemporary art or whatever, you know. Look at the literature coming out of India today. You know, it's astounding, which is creative as well, you know. So, you know, what is it? Any other questions?
Well, I just want to say maybe we can move the conversation to the reception we're going to have here, because I know some folks probably want to chat more with Stephen, and you'll have that opportunity. You might be a little hungry. So please, everyone, join us up in the front hall, and thank you so much again